The Washington-based think tank, Hudson Institute South and Central Asia Program, assembled a group of South Asia experts to evaluate 55 interlinked separatist Kashmiri and Khalistani groups currently operating within the US and the possibility that these groups receive funding, support, and military training from Pakistan. Their report, titled Pakistan's Destabilization Playbook, Khalistan Separatist Activism within the US, focuses on whether these groups have ties to militant and terrorist groups in India and could detrimentally impact US foreign policy in South Asia. The report calls on US law enforcement agencies to investigate these groups before their influence rises to a level where they could trigger the kind of violence in the Indian state of Punjab throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. The report says, and I quote, "The US government has shown reluctance to act on intelligence from India concerning Pakistan-supported Khalistan militancy, largely due to Pakistan's role as the artery providing logistical support to the US military mission in Afghanistan following 9/11. Compounding the issue, China has blocked the designation of Pakistan-based terrorists under the United States terrorist designation process within the United Nations Security Council." Unquote. Dr. Aparna Pande, who is the Director, Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia at Hudson, and one of the 6 authors of the 44-page report, spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports about why she and her colleagues think this brewing movement needs to be preemptively ended. I began by asking Dr. Pande what her overall assessment was about the brewing Khalistan movement in the US, Canada, and Britain.
So I would say, it is prevalent in the diaspora, as you know, in US, Canada, Britain. It is it is not as prevalent in the United States as it is in Canada or Britain. It doesn't the majority of the American population does not know that much about it. The majority of even the South Asian population doesn't know much about it. And it is still limited to a few groups. But it is there, and it has the potential to become something bigger and cause problems back home for India, as well as problems for law enforcement in the US, akin to some of the challenges that Canada is facing and UK is facing. So I'm one of those who believes, anticipate that something may happen. So try to prepare for it before it actually becomes something bigger.
Your report says that Pakistan's intelligence agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, may be assisting pro-Khalistan groups financially and organizationally. The word maybe is a bit loaded in such matters. Is there a possibility that it will be established clearly that Pakistan does indeed do that?
Yes, our report does trace, and what we look at, basically what we say is that the Pakistani intelligence service had a model before. They have done it with respect to the Kashmir activism, Kashmiri groups in the US, in Canada, UK, Europe, and other places. And we've given examples of where they have done that, including in the United States some years ago. I'm sure you read the example about Mr. Fai. So there was an example there, and we believe that what they are doing this time around is following that example with some of the Khalistani separatist and activist groups. It may not be to that large an extent, but it is still there, and they believe that they can use the same model, and in some ways combine the two. If you look at some of the things that these groups, the Khalistani groups, separatist groups, which we believe are more aligned or have connections to the Pakistani deep state, you see alignment with the Kashmiri groups, you see alignment with what the Pakistani intelligence services would want them to say. And I'll just give one example. I mean, for those who had asked for Khalistan many decades ago, Khalistan included what parts of what is Indian Punjab and Pakistani Punjab, right? It didn't just include parts of Indian Punjab. But these Khalistani groups, which have support from the Pakistani deep state, their maps only include Indian Punjab. So what happened to Pakistani Punjab? It's akin to the Kashmiri group saying India should give, But what about Pakistan's the Kashmir? What about Pakistani administered Kashmir? What about Gilgit-Baltistan? So, sort of when you are getting support from a particular group, then you try and tailor what you say as per that group's desires and goals.
Attached to that is the fact that the Sikhs are not particularly well looked after in Pakistan. The irony doesn't seem to strike them.
No, it doesn't. It's amazing. I'm sure you read the letters which one of the groups which we look at, Sikhs for Justice, their leader sent to Imran Khan, sent to President Putin and President Xi, and it's very interesting what they write in those letters. The one to Imran Khan talks about fall of Delhi after fall of Dhaka, basically to revenge the fall of Dhaka, and it's that sounds more like the Pakistani deep state than it sounds like like a Khalistani activist, separatist activist sitting in the United States. Why should 1971 bother you? Why should it matter to you? But it does. Or sort of the fact that sort of the Pakistani state has not really been good towards its minorities either.
Your report also says that the US government has shown no particular interest in the violence committed by the Khalistan activists. What do you think hamstrings the US at this particular point?
So why sort of, in earlier decades, I mean, through the Cold War, there was a reason why the US didn't do it. I mean, it was tactical. It was basically that, Pakistan was an ally, was a Cold War ally. So the US turned a blind eye to a lot of what the Pakistani deep state was doing in Kashmir, with respect sort of and support to the Khalistani groups. It's only from the 1990s that they even acknowledged any part of what the Pakistani deep state did with respect to supporting terrorism in India and in other parts. Sort of more recently, I don't think they understand the gravity of the situation. I don't think Khalistan, sort of the Khalistani separatist and activist and violent movement actually, sort of is high up on their list. If you actually look at the groups which have been designated FTOs after 9/11, there was only one Khalistani group, right? The International Sikh Youth Federation. No other group has been added in the last 20 years. There are other groups. There are many groups which India has spoken about, which Canada knows, but they have not been added. And I think it is all, as we understand, states have tunnel visions. So you look at what is there in front of you. You don't do the anticipation game of like 10 years out, 20 years out, something may happen, let me worry about it. So I don't think, so I do believe that US law enforcement does have an idea, because our report does talk about the fact that US law enforcement was watching many of the groups in California and their ties to drugs and crime and, sort of sending weapons back to India and things like that. But I don't believe it has moved from, it is not that important or not viewed as that important or critical by domestic law enforcement or by, or by the international law, intelligence agencies.
Since you mentioned California, when I first came to the US in 1998 to the Bay Area, a city called Fremont, there used to be a Gurudwara which routinely displayed photographs of what they called Khalistani martyrs. That was 23 years ago, and a lot of time has passed since then. But it hasn't amounted to much. Why do you think that is?
So I sort of, I do sort of, as the report says, and we do believe that there is very little or minuscule support for Khalistan back in India, in Indian Punjab. There is very little. I think there are various reasons over the years. There have been elections, democratic elections, different parties have won. The state is doing well, economically, politically, it is integrated. And so, there is sort of, you may find one stray person, doing something. Now, it doesn't mean that, if you actually go to some parts, sort of, you will see the museum, which has all the martyrs, quote unquote, of 1984, and their, photographs are there, and, there are sort of tributes to them. but there is no support for Khalistan back there. I believe it has remained in the diaspora, the people who left, the people who sort of came, and over the years they have tried to build it. Why do I believe it is sort of more prominent? I mean, it is more prominent in the diaspora. The reason is that one, there are people who believe that they can use this to some extent, and this is why we believe there's a role of the Pakistani deep state. They want to use it to create a rift of sorts between India and the United States. They want to use it to show, that sort of, India's democratic credentials are not what they are now. You and I can agree on the fact that India has fallen back in many areas of its democratic credentials, and that can be a separate discussion. But sort of the Khalistan issue right now is not one of those. Sort of it's not as though India is suppressing or repressing, sort of a movement or insurgency inside Punjab. That is not happening. So, sort of there are areas where we can agree on what India needs to do. But in this context, bringing it up is more of sort of, is a way to show that, you see, there's Kashmir, there's Khalistan, India, there's an Indian state which is doing all this, and therefore you should not get too close to them. And to also make the argument that if a state has so many problems, it will not be able to stand up to China. So we see it from that point of view, that it's an attempt to, to target India, indirectly, using US territory.
Right. That leads me to the question, the fact that Punjab is almost indifferent to this impulse any longer.
Yes. Yeah.
Doesn't that make it, this movement in the US or in Canada, in Britain, rather a delusional fantasy in the mind of these ragtag bands of people?
I would agree. And, I'm sure you followed that they spoke about something called Referendum 2020, right? It's end of 2021. The referendum hasn't gone anywhere. They haven't been able to do anything. They haven't even been able to do a referendum in the diaspora in any of these countries. But I think it is, see, they try to stay in the news, right? So I'm sure you followed that. So their tactics include three different things. One, filing lawsuits, which they know will go nowhere, especially in the United States, against prominent public leaders. And they've been doing it for about a decade or more, against Manmohan Singh, against Modi, against many others. But it gets that little news item, right? That so-and-so filed a lawsuit against this. Even the lawsuit was dismissed, they get their 2 lines in the news. Protests. Every time an Indian, official delegation, prime minister, anybody comes, they will have flags and they will protest in front of, the White House or, sort of the Capitol or the embassy. And again, they get their 2 minutes of news. So I think it is more to garner, to sustain the attention and sustain the support they are getting from their donors, to say that, see, we managed to do protests, we filed a lawsuit, even if it will go nowhere, we have kept the issue alive. That's how I see it.
One of the arguments that your report makes is that as India and the US strengthen their alliance against China, Pakistan, as a Chinese ally, feels compelled to seek to weaken it. One of the ways is to prop of Khalistanis. And you also bring in the idea of the Quad, a grouping of India, America, Japan, and Australia, which is meant to take on China.
So what we wanted to say was that, as the United States is in a peer competition or a peer rivalry with China. And what the US is telling its partners and its allies is, treat my rival as your rival, treat my threat as your threat. And therefore, more security collaboration, more economic, more connectivity, everything from climate change to technology, come closer to me and, let us stand up to and prevent Chinese preeminence or hegemony. What we say is, yes, it's true. And India should be part of this. But if you want me to view a country or an entity as my enemy because that entity is your enemy, you must do the same for me. During the Cold War, India sort of, often informed the United States when there were anti-Indian activity, whether it was Kashmiri or Khalistani by Pakistan. But the US ignored that at that time because Pakistan was an ally. What India is saying today, if you want me to treat entities as my rivals and threats, please treat my threats as your threats as well. And in that context, we say that the US and therefore the US law enforcement should act against any groups or entities that are threatening India. And therefore we give a list of recommendations saying that please do these things, find out. I mean, we are scholars, we are not law enforcement, we don't have access to any intelligence data. All we go by is what we see. So we are saying we would like the US law enforcement to look into these groups, look into their financials, look into their connections, look into the information that India has shared with its American counterparts, and see if there is something that can be done and they can take action against any of them.
In terms of funding by Pakistan, have you been able to broadly quantify how regular it is and how much it might be?
No, we weren't able to get the amount. I mean, the detailed amount of how much comes in. But what we have done is we have shown a link between 55 groups, which are Khalistani, Kashmiri and Kashmiri separatist activists. And we say that, they share similar accountants. They have similar funds coming in. They are at the same rallies. They have same addresses sometimes. So what we say is, we are giving this to law enforcement. These are these 55 groups. We have done data mining through IRS and FARA and everything. So what we want them to do is look at this and look at these groups. We can't do more than this because this is all we can do from open source. But we have gone through that. So which is why we give the example of Ghulam Nabi Fai, that for a long time, he used, nobody thought that he was getting money from the Pakistani intelligence. They thought he was getting it from Pakistani Americans. Right. It's only when they actually went into detail that the FBI found out that it wasn't true. So we are saying we are giving you these lists. We have this with us. We will give this to you. It's out there in the open. Please go through, because we find connections and they look suspicious to us. But beyond that, it is law enforcement's duty.
Right. One of your worries, as you point out, is the collaboration between the Khalistanis and the Kashmiri groups here.
Absolutely.
Is that contact a regular feature between them, or they just meet occasionally?
So there are two different things. One, there are groups like there are groups like the Khalistan Kashmir Action Front, right? And so that combines the Sikhs for Justice on the one hand and the Kashmiri groups on the other. Right. And so they've had rallies together and demonstrations held together. So in other cases, you will find joint flags at the other's event. So when there's an event, when they are holding a demonstration outside the Indian embassy or near Gandhi's statue or something, you'll find flags of both.
Right.
So it is that is what we've been able to find, that they work together. They have similar activities. And so that shows, and some of the events they will host together, that shows us, or where they show up, that shows us that there is a deeper collaboration, especially if, organizations have people from both groups.
Right.
It shows that they are working now. Obviously there are things each side wants, but on the other hand, they are willing to tailor it, right? So these Kashmir groups are the ones which are not asking for all of Kashmir, which would include Pakistan, I would say with China and with India, but they only ask for that part of Kashmir which is with India.
Right.
And same thing on the Khalistani group side.
Yeah, it's all very convenient, yes.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's and it's interesting, because we understand it, when Mayank sees that, you'll say, okay, but what about the Pakistani side of Punjab? Isn't that also supposed to be part of original Khalistan?
Yeah.
So why are you leaving that out?
True. I must tell you a rather funny story. As I mentioned in my email, I used to report on the latter half of the Khalistan separatist movement out of Punjab. Once I was driving from Delhi to Punjab, and somewhere around Hoshiarpur we reached around midnight, and my taxi driver was really panicking
Yeah.
because he was not used to this. So there was a guy at some distance waiting with a Kalashnikov. I could see the silhouette, and he was asking us to stop. And the taxi driver said, "Sir, मैं तो भाग रहा हूँ यहाँ से." I said, "Listen, we can't do that. Just leave it to me. Nothing will happen."
Yeah.
So we approached that guy, and it was winter, so my windows were rolled up. So he said, "Roll it down." I rolled down. All that he said, "Oh, Praju, से लंगर लगा कुछ लस्सी वस्सी पाके जाओ जी." And he was a Khalistani.
Yeah.
Absolutely Khalistan. But look, I was quite struck by the cultural impulses working even within that insurgent movement.
Yes.
And my taxi driver was deeply relieved. I said, "I told you nothing happens
nothing
here. I
will-
mean, they
yeah.
have Kalashnikov, they might do a few things. But the point is, it is, I think that cultural impulse may still moderate some of their vehemence and aggression. That's what my feeling is.
No, I mean, I do believe that it is a very small numbers, very small percentage of the Sikh diaspora. It is a very small percentage of it. And of that, there are some who are, basically, you have a right in a democracy to protest and to ask for something. Nobody comes in. I have no problem with that. Full freedom to ask for what you want. The problem comes when it is criminal, when there's drug related, when there's force, when there's violence, and when you are inciting activity or terrorism back home. That is when the problems come. So our interest was mainly in that part, and I think that the diaspora, by and large, is a diaspora which is it's a diaspora which gives a lot to its community. It's a diaspora which does a lot. And so the problems come when there are these few individuals, whether it is used to be at the Fremont Gurdwara or a few other places across the country, where individuals with a certain interest are, misusing something. And then these groups like Sikhs for Justice. I must tell you, Mayank, since our report came out, every day, I mean, for the first 1 week, all the report authors whose emails were available online received 100 emails a day. And now we received about 20. I think they've got bored. But basically, it's the exact same email.
Oh, I see.
So the first email which came was from the head of Sikhs for Justice, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. He basically criticized our report and said, you are a biased group of people. And said that we are going to raise $1 million to give the Taliban in Afghanistan. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to give $1 million to Taliban who are killing Sikhs in Afghanistan. Huh? And then every subsequent email is it has the same title, $1 million for Taliban in Afghanistan, and it's exact same. And it's like basically, bots coming. So I've counted, how many emails I've got. But it's like I'm thinking, seriously? It really hurt. It really hurt you somewhere, which is why you are spamming us.
It's hilarious if you look at it.
Yeah.
But since you mentioned drugs as one of the points, the fact that Punjab has this very serious drug problem, and there is a fairly large constituency of disenchanted youth.
Yes.
Do you think these pro-Khalistani groups might try to exploit that particular area?
I think they will, not just from here. I think they they may at some level do it also across the border from Pakistani Punjab. So I do believe those groups, those youth are susceptible, to both to the drug mafia and the criminal mafia, but also to people from across the border and from the diaspora who tell them to indulge in violence. I hope that doesn't happen. And I do believe that, if you look at even the protests which have taken place on the farm laws, they've all been sort of I mean, they've all stuck to that except for a random person or two. Everybody has stuck to basically it being agriculture, farm related, farmers related. They've been open, they've had langars, they've had people
Right.
coming. So it's been if if there was a broader, let's say Khalistani activist or separatist presence, I believe we would have seen it in these protests coming
Right.
out,
Right.
but they didn't.
Right.
So maybe there were some who wanted to and others pushed back, which is what you need. You need societies, elders, or the community pushing back against those who are the fringe element.
Right. And
Uh,
finally, to wrap up, how seriously do you think that the Indian government is taking these brewing moments?
I do believe they are taking them very seriously. And and there has been a lot of information shared by the Indian government with the American government. I'm sure you saw that they have placed Sikhs for Justice and a few other groups on the list of NIA as terror groups, and tried to close stop any funding. But they are concerned. I think they're concerned because, again, you know for those of us who have lived through what happened in the 70s, 80s, I
Right.
mean, 90s, you don't want a return in any part of your country to what happened at
Absolutely.
that time.
Absolutely.
There's a lot going on. You want people to move ahead. You don't want it going back. So I think they are concerned. I don't know exactly what they are doing, but I do know that they are deeply concerned and they have shared, which is why in our recommendations we say, you have received information from your Indian counterparts. Look at those dossiers and information they have sent, talk to them, and investigate these groups and see what is there. You
Right.
will know whether these groups are just drug and crime, they are actually supporting terrorism, or they are none of that and they are just people who are protesting. At least it will clarify it for everyone.
Right. And to conclude now, now that the US is out of Afghanistan and Pakistan is no longer a logistical necessity for Washington, do you think that the Biden administration might pay a little more attention to what you're raising?
So I think it can work both ways. I would put it this way. There appears to be a belief in this administration that terrorism is no longer the important thing to worry about. Right? It's
Right.
the war of the past, and the peer rivalry with China is the war of the future. So
Right.
it's all about technology and security, technology, climate change, everything, but no reference to terrorism. I'm one of those who believes that terrorism is here. It's not going away anywhere.
Right.
It could be got sort of it. It could be the Middle East. It could be Central Asia, South Asia. Everywhere we still have to worry about terrorism,
Right.
and the rivalry with China will include that part as well.
True.
So I hope that there is continued attention paid to this, and I hope that because of India's concerns, the US does look at this issue as well.